Twilight Princess is a game caught between two eras. Much like how Twilight sits between day and night, the game named for that time of day straddles the era of Zelda games that use traditional controls and an era of Zelda games that use new and unique ways to interact. The early aughts were a big time of transition for Nintendo. The company was looking to take on a new form as it dealt with a downturn in the gaming industry in Japan. Nintendo referred to it as gamer drift. Company leadership decided the best way to combat the downturn was to develop new, exciting ways to play. One way the company hoped to do this was with the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube connectivity features. There are also two new systems that promised to change the way that people played in the works. It was at this time that the Zelda team was starting initial work on a GameCube follow-up to The Wind Waker. That game was a critical and commercial success, though sales were notably down in Japan. Speaking at the Game Developers Conference in 2007, series producer Eiji Aonuma stated that series co-creator Shigeru Miyamoto believed the reason for the weak sales in Japan were twofold. First, that the series had not been able to redefine itself in the same way that it had when it made the jump from 2D to 3D with Ocarina of Time. And secondly, that people who didn't play Zelda games already were intimidated and believed that they were too complicated.
So we started on a project that utilized Wind Waker assets and was based on the theme of creating a new style of gameplay. We called this project Wind Waker 2, and it was eventually reborn as Twilight Princess.
That was the voice of Aonuma's translator at GDC in 2007. You will hear her voice a number of times throughout this episode. And this is Legendary Adventures, a Legend of Zelda playthrough podcast. This week we're kicking off Season 12, which is all about Twilight Princess, beginning with a look at its development, starting with the transition from the Wind Waker 2 into a realistic Zelda project that would become the game that we know today. In 2003, the Zelda team began initial work on the Wind Waker 2. The game was mentioned in at least a few interviews in 2003. One was an interview with Nintendo Dream focused on the Wind Waker. It was translated and posted on Good Blood Games. Eiji Aonuma was asked about the possibility of a Wind Waker sequel. Aonuma suggested that he would not be involved. Well, maybe it's possible, he said, but who makes it will be a different story. Aonuma has related multiple times over the years that he attempted to quit and leave the Zelda team around this time. At the close of the Wind Waker project, I seriously considered whether I had any fresh ideas for future Zelda games, and actually told Mr. Miyamoto that I didn't want to be involved with Zelda development, Aonuma told Nintendo Power in 2005. Fortunately, he persuaded me to continue with the series, and I was put in charge of the upcoming Zelda game as the producer. Aonuma was actually named producer over the entire Zelda series. He jumped right into managing multiple projects, including the two entries released just prior to Twilight Princess, Four Swords Adventures and The Minish Cap. You can check out Seasons 10 and 11 for more detail on those games. I bring them up because the developments were all interwoven, and from interviews it seems that for much of the development of Twilight Princess, it struggled with something of a leadership vacuum. Aonuma's attention was split between multiple projects. He initially tried to work on Twilight Princess purely as a producer, but as time went on and the project was struggling, he ultimately took it over as director. As mentioned, it was initially stated that the Wind Waker 2 project would use the Wind Waker's engine and assets. Aonuma told Computer and Video Games magazine in May 2003, "As I did between Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, I will use the same engine and the same graphics of the Wind Waker for its sequel. However, I do plan on powering everything up a bit." He didn't provide much detail beyond that. He wasn't even able to say if the game would be another seafaring adventure, saying, "With regards to Link's method of transport in Wind Waker 2, I still don't know. The playfield has not been determined yet." Aonuma did say that he wanted to have something to show of the Wind Waker sequel ready in time for the E3 trade show in 2004. At E3 in 2003, Nintendo showed off multiplayer Zelda projects. The company also revealed the Wind Waker had already sold 1 million copies in North America within just a month of its first release. Behind the scenes, however, Aonuma was growing concerned with the Wind Waker 2. He said there was a measurable decline in the North American sales after that first million sold. He spoke to someone at Nintendo of America, and they blamed the slowdown on the cartoonish look of the Wind Waker. This added to doubts that Aonuma had about moving forward with the Wind Waker 2 in its current conception. In his 2007 speech at GDC, Aonuma explained the reason for these doubts.
Because we knew how difficult it would be to create an innovative way of playing using the existing GameCube hardware, we knew what a challenge it would be to develop something that would sell in the Japanese market, where gamer drift was happening.
In August 2003, IGN reported that Shigeru Miyamoto confirmed that the follow-up to the Wind Waker would retain its distinct cel-shaded look. But by the end of 2003, Aonuma pushed for a change. He decided if there wasn't an immediate solution to creating a gameplay shift as dramatic as the shift from 2D to 3D, he would instead have the team working on giving the healthy North American market exactly what it wanted.
So at the end of 2003, I went to Miyamoto and said, I want to make a realistic Zelda. Miyamoto was skeptical at first.
Miyamoto's initial skepticism is perhaps understandable. The team had just spent 2.5 years making the Wind Waker, creating a new engine and art style for that game. Starting from scratch to build something with an entirely different engine would be costly and time-consuming. So Miyamoto still gave the green light, provided they stuck to a few guidelines.
And he advised me that if you really want to make a realistic Zelda, then you should start by doing what you couldn't in the Ocarina of Time. Make it so that Link can attack enemies while riding on his horse using the Wind Waker engine, and make your decision based on how that feels.
Meanwhile, the team developing the Wind Waker 2 were struggling and their progress had slowed. They had decided to set the game on land and wanted to bring back horse riding. But they were having a hard time making it work with the Toon Link design from the Wind Waker. In an interview included in the book The Legend of Zelda: Art and Artifacts, art director Satoru Takizawa said, "The desire to depict Toon Link on a horse riding around the Great Plains was great. However, with his short stature and short arms and legs, it would have been difficult to make him look good on a horse." Aonuma, having gotten the green light to change the direction of the Wind Waker 2, was concerned the team was not going to be happy with his decision. But instead, they embraced it fully, and it gave the project a much-needed jump start. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy was popular at this time, and the team decided to use it as inspiration as they restarted the project. Art director Satoru Takizawa decided to bring in illustrator Yusuke Nakano to create a new design for Link. According to Takizawa and Nakano, this was not a typical move within Nintendo at that time. Illustrators were typically brought in to create promotional art after designs had been set and the game's assets had been created. In the Art and Artifacts interview, Takizawa said, "In order for the project to match the scope we wanted, we needed to collaborate with external artists to move forward not just with our internal designers. For that to work, we needed detailed sketches for the early stages of development. That's why I wanted to have Nakano-san on board from the start." Nakano said that he was inspired by the challenge of creating a realistic Link. In the Art and Artifacts interview, he said, "I wanted Link to look realistic, so I put details on him to make him look dusty and a bit dirty, along with other little touches. I really wanted to give Link a new look." Early on, they also considered aging up Link. The initial sketches depicted Link in his mid-20s to early 30s. He was lean but muscular. Sturdy's the word that Nakano used. They shared these initial drawings with Nintendo staff in North America, since the whole idea was to create a game that catered to the North American market. The response I got back was, "What fans want is the Link they saw in Ocarina of Time," Nakano said. So in the end, his face and body type were made similar to that of the adult Link in that game. As they shifted the visual style of the game, the team went to work on creating the mechanics that would allow Link to fight while on horseback. Aonuma said the very first thing that they created was a version of the scene where players fight King Bulblin on horseback in the final game. He said they overhauled the visuals and had that set piece up and running within 4 months. While the team was overhauling the game, Nintendo said nothing. The world at large had no idea that changes were being made. In fact, they kinda seem to have forgotten about the Wind Waker 2 project altogether. Aonuma spoke at the Game Developer Conference in March of 2004. In his remarks, he included a slide showing sales numbers for most Zelda titles released to that point. It included the development of the Wind Waker 2 on it. He also specifically mentioned that he planned to talk about The Wind Waker 2 at E3 2004. Outlets like IGN seemed stunned by this mention. They wrote an entire article claiming that Aonuma had inadvertently confirmed the existence of a Wind Waker sequel. That's despite the fact that Aonuma had obviously very purposely included the mention in his presentation, and IGN and other outlets had previously reported on a GameCube follow-up being in the works. On top of it all, Aonuma had spoken about it and had even referred to it as the Wind Waker 2 in at least one interview in 2003. Now, to be fair, the IGN article admits that this is not truly new information, but rather a confirmation, but it seems to me that this was all pretty much confirmed by that point. At any rate, there was excitement building towards the Wind Waker 2 at E3, which was to be held in May 2004. Just after GDC, again in March, Aonuma took part in an interview with reporters from multiple outlets. Both IGN and Nintendo World Report published versions of this interview. Both outlets explained that the interview was put under embargo, meaning that it could not be released until after E3. Questions were asked about the Wind Waker 2. Aonuma told reporters it would be a big focus of Nintendo's E3 presentation. He also mentioned that he wanted to continue to develop the Focus system, where Link would look at items of interest, but he wasn't really revealing much. A Nintendo rep explained, "We're kind of working off the Big Bang Theory, so we're gonna hit you with a big bang at E3. Aonuma added, "We're making something that is going to be very interesting, that is going to surprise you all very much."
My name is Reggie, I'm about kicking ass, I'm about taking names, and we're about making games.
Nintendo's 2004 E3 press conference was led by Reggie Fils-Aimé. At that time, he was the head of Nintendo's marketing, and was on his way to becoming the head of Nintendo of America. This was his public debut as the new face of the company. The presentation showed off new titles for the GameCube, the Game Boy Advance, and it also showed off the Nintendo DS for the first time. Nintendo President Satoru Iwata also teased Nintendo's next home console.
I want you to know that Nintendo is working on our next system, and that system will create a gaming revolution.
The system was codenamed Revolution, and throughout the presentation, Iwata, Fils-Aimé, and others said Nintendo was looking to reinvent the video game market, with new ways of playing with new devices. They wanted to win over a wider audience, beyond just hardcore gamers.
The time when horsepower alone made an important difference is over. From this time on, we must create something more unprecedented experiences, the same way we have with Nintendo DS.
There was one announcement, however, that stole the show, and Nintendo saved it for the very end.
I hope you've all enjoyed our program this morning. But before you leave, I'd like you to step inside one more world for Nintendo GameCube.
The trailer begins with shots of a forest, with light filtering through the canopy, a thunderstorm, an army silhouetted against a sunset. A lone rider makes his way toward the army. It soon becomes clear that that lone rider is Link. The crowd erupts in cheers. The music is a piece known as Riders of Doom. It's by Basil Polidorus, composed for the 1982 movie Conan the Barbarian. The music choice is deliberate. The same music was used in advertising for Ocarina of Time. The trailer for the new game also has a similar design to those Ocarina of Time ads as well, with screens of text interspersed with quick shots of action. This game also clearly had a dark, gritty, realistic aesthetic, like many vocal fans had been calling for ever since the reveal of The Wind Waker. After the trailer ended, Shigeru Miyamoto appeared on stage, Master Sword and Hylian shield in hand. In an Iwata-asked interview, character designer Satomi Asakawa noted that the Zelda team had been nervous heading into E3. She said, "It really felt like the reaction to that movie would cement the overall direction of the game. Their nerves melted away after the trailer, and Miyamoto's appearance received a standing ovation."
In order to grow, Link must not stand still. And neither can I. So, thank you. And goodbye.
Nintendo PR rep Perrin Kaplan said, "It was like crazed fans at a Beatles concert. People were freaking out. It was great. The sound in the room was awesome." While IGN described the reaction from the crowd as approaching a pure state of euphoria. In an Iwata Asks interview, Nintendo's president noted, "There were even people in the crowd who were crying," he laughed. "I expected the excited cheering, but honestly, I didn't think anyone would be moved to tears." Art director Satoru Takizawa described the reaction as energizing, saying, "I found that it also motivated me during the development that followed. Since this was such a big project, there were times when everyone started to feel mentally drained. At those times, and even now, I must admit, just thinking of that movie and the positive reaction is enough to keep me going," he laughed. In an interview following the press conference, Aonuma proudly stated the trailer was made all in-engine with in-game graphics. He said it was created by an employee of Nintendo of America who had played a version of the game and then stitched together recorded gameplay. Members of the press praised the game's graphics and appearance, though they wondered why a playable demo was not available at the show. Aonuma said they planned to release the game in 2005, and that the press would have a chance to go hands-on at E3 2005. Both Aonuma and Miyamoto stressed the game would focus on a more grown-up version of Link. They would not reveal much else to the gathered press at that time, however.
Knowing that I had raised the expectations of end users by promising that a realistic Zelda was on the way, I knew that I had to come up with something brilliant. Something that would take advantage of the look of the game. My staff suggested that changing the environment would change the gameplay, and looking to past Zelda games which use the contrast between two different worlds, dark and light, past and future, we thought to incorporate this idea again. This is when the idea that Link would transform into a wolf was proposed.
Speaking to Nintendo Dream in 2007, Aonuma said he came up with the idea for Wolf Link in March 2004. According to a translation posted on ZeldaDungeon.net, he said, "I woke up in my hotel in San Francisco completely disoriented, like I had lost my memory. Some seconds later I remembered I was in the US to give a speech at the GDC. Maybe it was because of the stress," he laughed. "I then thought how surprising it'd be if in the next Zelda game, Link started off being imprisoned or turned into a wolf." In a 2016 interview on the now-defunct Nintendo social media service Miiverse, Aonuma expanded on that story. He said, "I randomly had this dream that I was a wolf shut up inside a jail cell. While I was pondering why on earth I'd been a wolf in my dream, I got the urge to try putting it in a game." In an Iwata Asks interview, Aonuma said he suggested the wolf transformation as a way to get the ball rolling on the game. "I was curious how everyone would take it," he said. "That's what I was thinking when I threw it out there. This time, let's make him a wolf." Miyamoto-san really gave me a piece of his mind after that, he laughed. "I remember him telling me it's a lot harder to make a four-legged animal than it is to make a two-legged human, you know." He laughed again. Despite the difficulty, Aonuma said in his 2007 GDC speech that he felt the wolf form would be the kind of disruptive breakthrough the staff needed to change their way of thinking, in order to find something to distinguish itself from past entries. Aonuma admitted to being concerned that they hadn't found anything truly innovative for the new project. He still hoped that they would. But he also acknowledged the wolf concept took some inspiration from Link's transformation into a rabbit in A Link to the Past. Still, he felt the wolf combined the wild with the heroic. It was different enough. At this point, Aonuma said he turned his focus to the Minish Cap. He left the team to develop the wolf concept further. The Minish Cap was in the home stretch of development, and it was set to release in Japan and Europe at the end of 2004. But Aonuma admitted in his 2007 GDC speech,
In hindsight, by immersing myself in the Minish Cap project, I gave myself a way to escape from not being able to find a breakthrough on the realistic Zelda project. I regret that I might have been too selfish, thinking I could just leave my staff to come up with a solution, but my mistaken thinking caught up with me later.
While Aonuma worked on the launch of the Minish Cap, the team began to develop Wolf Link. In terms of visual design, illustrator Yusuke Nakano said in the Art and Artifacts interview that he was careful to keep the eyes between Wolf Link and Human Link consistent, though some early designs for Wolf Link are quite different than the final design. In that 2016 interview on Miiverse, Aonuma said, "Since it was still Link, just changed into a wolf, we wanted to retain some of Link's design and his heroic air. We added a bit of Link's trademark green, made his body more angular, more heroic looking, also gave his eyes the same sort of feel that they had when he was a human. We changed many little details like that, and eventually ended up with the design that you see today. Player designer Keisuke Nishimori was in charge of designing player interactions with playable characters in the game. That's the movement and animations for Link, Wolf Link, and Epona. In an Iwata Asks interview, he said advice from Miyamoto about the design of Wolf Link would result in a major change in the game. When we were discussing the wolf's design, Miyamoto-san said, "It's no fun just to look at the back of a four-legged animal all the time," he said. It's true that with a four-legged animal, if you look sideways or from an angle, you can clearly see the motion of the legs and the overall way the character moves. But if you look from directly behind, it looks really boring compared to a human character's movements. So Miyamoto-san told us to have someone riding the wolf. In the early stages, we went for a very unassuming character on the wolf's back, but by the end we had made this character occupy a central place in the game. That character of course morphed into Midna over time, Link's companion for the game. Aonuma briefly described how Midna morphed into that central character during his 2016 Miiverse interview. He said, "We planned an imp character, and made it intentionally unclear whether she was a friend or enemy. Then we asked ourselves, why would this character want to help Link? And the conclusion we came up with was, because there's something that she wants to resolve through helping him, which led us to decide that she was the princess of the Twilight Realm, who was exiled and cursed with a changed form." After launching the Minish Cap without a hitch, Aonuma returned to the Twilight Princess team, only to find that the project was struggling.
There were various small sections of gameplay that would create the framework for the game. There wasn't one single distinctive model of play or a timeline that would connect each of the events.
This was around the end of 2004, heading into 2005. In a May 2005 write-up from GameSpot, Aonuma was quoted as saying that he took a build of the game to Miyamoto, and he said that Miyamoto then upended the tea table. After that, Aonuma stepped in to work not only as producer on the project, but as the supervising director. Around this same time, the team was given a directive to make Twilight Princess 120% Zelda. Aonuma knew that a good E3 showing in 2005 would be essential. He made E3 and pulling the game together out of its current fragmented state the first priority, with plans to focus on the 120% initiative after E3. Sub-directors Makoto Miyaga and Shinichi Ikematsu were brought in after Aonuma took over as director. Miyaga previously worked on Ocarina of Time, where he helped design Hyrule Field. Twilight Princess is the second Zelda title that he worked on. Ikematsu worked on dungeons for Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and he was a map designer on The Wind Waker. Both described having the impression that Twilight Princess was far along in development when they joined the team, only to quickly find that was not the case. I was astonished to find out the overall structure of the game hadn't even been finalized yet, Miyaga said with a laugh during an Iwata Asks interview. All the individual materials were there, but the foundation hadn't been laid yet. So we started making that foundation. Ikematsu added, "In the team we used to talk about starting by making the box. What this means is that without a box, this is a space to play, there was no way of verifying anything in the game, and no way to know how people would enjoy it. That's why we decided to begin working on creating that box. Once the box is done, everyone can start putting things in it, and it starts to become clear which ideas work well." At E3 2005, the public got to go hands-on with Twilight Princess for the first time. Nintendo's press conference was largely focused on the Nintendo DS and the upcoming Wii, still going by its codename Revolution. The console was shown for the first time, though notably the Wii Remote and the motion control focus were still being kept under wraps. Nintendo president Satoru Iwata and marketing head Reggie Fils-Aimé, who was now just 1 year away from becoming the head of Nintendo of America, stressed that Nintendo was looking to grow the video game market by winning over gamers and non-gamers alike with their new consoles and experiences. The press conference was capped off with a new trailer for Twilight Princess. The trailer gave the first look at Midna, Link's wolf transformation and the Twilight Realm. Notably, animations look much rougher in the trailer compared to the final game, and some character designs had not yet been finalized, such as Midna's. The Twilight Realm also appeared in black and white, much like how Hyrule Castle appeared prior to pulling the Master Sword in the Wind Waker. The trailer ended with a reveal of the game's title. But the real draw was the Zelda booth, which allowed players to try the game for the first time. Nintendo went all out for the booth, which featured 2 themed rooms connected by a hallway. The first room was forest-themed, with a couple of trees in the center of the room and images of trees on the walls. There was an interactive projection on the floor with a collapsing bridge over a pond, with fish that responded to the movement of attendees. In the hallway between the rooms, visitors found projections of scenes from the game, and an animatronic Stalfos inside a jail cell. It would raise its sword and hit the bars as people passed. The second room was dungeon-themed, and featured an animatronic wolf Link, which would growl and lunge at passers-by. Players were able to check out 4 playable segments from the game. These segments were split between the 2 rooms. The first room featured Tauru Village, or Ordon Village as it would become known in the final translation. Write-ups on the demo note that it started with the goat-herding minigame that's seen in the final game. It then went to the moment when Ilya takes Link's horse. This is also seen in the final game, although some of the story details were different. There were some early versions of activities that are found in the village, including helping Russell's wife Uli retrieve her cradle, which in the demo floated downstream, and saw players hopping into a canoe to chase it. Players could also get a sword from Russell and practice with it. Notably, Link also seems to have had the ability to crouch while in the village, a holdover from the Wind Waker. The second playable segment was the horse battle and joust between Link and King Bulblin, seen in the final game. The final 2 playable segments in the dungeon room featured the Forest Temple. The first segment allowed players to venture through roughly half of the dungeon. They could go as far as the mini-boss fight. There are differences between the final design and the demo, including enemy placement that likely reflected an earlier stage of development, such as Lizalfos being in the dungeon rather than the Bokoblins. Other changes were more than likely done for the benefit of the demo. For example, players get the Gale Boomerang from a chest in the second room of the dungeon. The final playable segment was the boss fight against the Forest Temple boss, Diababa. Aonuma was pleased with the fan response from E3 2005. He felt the demo and presentations had lived up to fan expectations. In his 2007 speech, Aonuma noted that some people had waited up to 3 hours to try the demo. A write-up from Insider noted a 4-hour wait, while IGN stated that the wait never dipped below an hour. Still, Aonuma had concerns that the game wasn't doing anything truly revolutionary. At this point, work had already started on the first DS entry for Zelda, Phantom Hourglass, and Aonuma noted the stylus controls that they were implementing in the DS game felt like the type of innovation that he was after. Around this time, Shigeru Miyamoto suggested making Twilight Princess a Wii game. Miyamoto told him that the Wii's pointer felt like it was designed specifically for arrow control in Zelda. Aonuma said he'd been curious to explore the Wii motion controls, but he figured that would not happen until after Twilight Princess. At Miyamoto's suggestion, tests were performed.
Though the pointer control that we developed as a trial still needed tweaking, and as imperfect as it was, the feeling of being able to aim directly at the target on the screen was, as with the DS version, exactly what was needed to give Zelda a completely new feel. Having experienced it, I was convinced that that was the only direction we could take.
However, Twilight Princess still needed polish, especially if it were to meet the goal of being 120% Zelda. The game's development staff contributed a number of articles to Nintendo Power following the 2005 E3 show, and in many of the early ones, the staff noted that they would have to skip summer vacations with their families in order to complete the game. Aonuma also didn't want to disappoint fans who were expecting a GameCube release. On top of it all, the Wii was not set to release until 2006, and a 2005 release was already announced for Twilight Princess. Satoru Iwata gave the green light to Miyamoto and Aonuma to delay the game into 2006, so that they could develop a Wii version side by side with the GameCube version. As far as the delay goes, it seems most members of the team were happy with it. Here's just a sampling of some of what the staff members had to say during an Iwata Asks interview. Anime designer Yoshiyuki Oyama said, "When the extension was finalized, part of me was relieved that we would have more time to create more things for the game. But another part of me realized that this meant having to work on the same project for another year. In the end, the feeling of happiness at being able to create more things in the game was much greater." Player designer Keisuke Nishimura said, "I felt glad to have more time to polish the game. With that extra time, you don't merely make minor adjustments. You continue to improve it as a game by adding as many new elements as possible. So the more time I have, the happier I am." Dungeon designer Koji Kitagawa said, "Honestly, I was one of the people who was happy to hear about the delay. At the beginning of the project, the director, Aonuma-san, told me how many dungeons to make, and it just wouldn't have been possible to make that many by the original deadline. But with the delay, it was possible to put together a realistic plan to create that many dungeons. Of course, I mean this in terms of quality as well as quantity. With the extra year, I felt we were able to polish the dungeons to a level that I'm personally satisfied with." As for developing the Wii version, the developers weren't necessarily on board at first. Oyama said, "There was resistance to the idea within the team at first, as people thought the GameCube controller they were used to would work better for the game. However, the developers all say that they were eventually won over by the Wii version and the motion controls." It wasn't easy developing the Wii version and its control scheme, however. Nishimura said, "It doubled our work, to put it simply. So even though we had an extra year to do it, we didn't feel like we could afford to take our time. Quite the opposite. We were working flat out right to the end. It took a lot of trial and error to get the Wii controls right." Aonuma said they tried a variety of ideas, including using the Wii Remote's pointer to move Link in a similar fashion to how the stylus is used to move in Phantom Hourglass. Ultimately, they dropped that idea. They also tried having the game switch to first person for combat encounters so that players could swing the sword with the Wii Remote. It didn't work. They restored the third person view and decided to drop swinging the remote for swinging Link's sword, because Link is left-handed, and they said it didn't feel good to swing the remote with your right hand and make Link's left hand move. The control scheme they initially settled on assigned Link's sword to the B button, his items to the direction buttons. Throwing items and objects was performed with a shake of the nunchuck, as was Link's spin attack. I should perhaps pause here briefly to note that Shigeru Miyamoto was much more involved in the creation of Twilight Princess than he was with the two previous titles directed by Aonuma, Majora's Mask and The Wind Waker. Miyamoto has stated in past interviews that Aonuma was pretty much independent on Majora's Mask, though Miyamoto did provide some suggestions and feedback. He pegged his own participation in that game around 20%. After reading through interviews, it's clear that it was a similar situation on The Wind Waker. Miyamoto's increased involvement with Twilight Princess is likely in part because Aonuma took over the role of directing the game. He told GameSpot after E3 2005 that after overturning the tea table earlier, his job was to help Aonuma clean up the table. He also said that he was helping with some general production tasks that Aonuma was too busy to handle. Miyamoto wound up playing a big role in shaping the final form of Twilight Princess. Over the course of its development, Twilight Princess ballooned into the largest Zelda project ever, and it was the biggest project inside Nintendo. Aonuma said in an Iwata Asks interview that he realized around the middle of development the game was getting a lot bigger than he originally envisioned, both in terms of the scale of the game's environments, but also with the behind-the-scenes staff. He said he attempted to rein it in a bit, but ultimately he said the increase in scale was happening naturally, and it was necessary to design a world that they felt was convincing in a realistic way. Many of the staff members were relatively new. They worked on 1, maybe 2 games prior to Twilight Princess. Miyamoto said that inexperience contributed to some of the struggles experienced on the project. In an Iwata Asks interview, Miyamoto said, "Many staff members weren't able to properly execute the most fundamental parts of their assignments. They weren't able to play catch yet. In fact, they hadn't even got the gist, such as catching the ball in the middle of the glove. Sloppy work, you might say. That's why I've mostly been helping by explaining to them clearly so they could better understand what they're supposed to do in order to correctly execute their assignments." There's one thing I have been grateful for, and that's the level of motivation these people have. The cause of their sloppiness is not due to people's lack of motivation, but more that they were stuck in a rut due to the huge amount of work that they had. The staff was mixed during an Iwata Asks interview on whether they would call Miyamoto's actions reshaping the game upending the T-table. Miyamoto does have a reputation for sending games in new directions after development is already well underway. Some employees felt that Miyamoto was too deliberate and constructive in his advice for it to truly be an upending. Others felt that Miyamoto was fully upending the T-table regularly. Aonuma said that Miyamoto did his upending in a slightly more considerate manner, while Miyamoto personally characterized his actions not as upending, but rearranging. The staff noted that Miyamoto would send emails to staff members to highlight changes that he wanted to see. Twilight Princess writer Aya Kiyogoku dubbed them sob story emails. She said, "These were emails where he would describe what he did and what happened in the game and why it made him sad. In the later stages of development, there was a sob story email every night." Aonuma said he would not just receive sob story emails, but sob story text messages. He recalled receiving texts while riding the train to work. In at least one instance that he described in an Iwata Asks interview, he got 4 texts, one right after the other. He said that Miyamoto was sending these texts to him while he was in a meeting unrelated to Twilight Princess. In a promotional interview for Twilight Princess HD, Aonuma said, "It was a shock, like, oh man, I need to get the office now. So I moved quickly to the train cars ahead of me. I knew that wouldn't get me there any faster, but still I remember the sense of urgency. I remember because that's how much effort I put in together with Mr. Miyamoto to finish up Twilight Princess." Here's a sampling of a few changes that Miyamoto wanted made. In the 2007 Nintendo Dream interview, Aonuma said that he initially planned for Link to be transformed into a wolf at the very start of the game. He said Miyamoto rejected that idea, which is how Ordon Village became the starting area of the game. In an Iwata Asks interview, sub-director Kentaro Tominaga said of Ordon Village, "That was specifically designed for E3. Because it was a self-contained level, the task of integrating it into the main Zelda game involved making a lot of adjustments. We didn't quite know what to do. Miyamoto-san did that for us, which was a great help. There are more changes coming to the opening later, but we'll touch on those in a bit." Initially, Link had one climbing animation. The same animation was used for climbing on both ladders and walls of ivy. Miyamoto felt that using only a single animation did not match the goal of realism. In an Iwata Asks interview, art director Satoru Takizawa said, "We thought it wouldn't be a problem because these two actions used the same animation in all the previous games. But in the end, that's not really a good reason to do it that way. So we reviewed the demo for about a week and identified a number of things that made us think, he'll definitely notice this. We better change it or we'll be in trouble. In the end, we cleaned it up quite a bit." Player designer Keisuke Nishimura noted in an Iwata Asks interview that Miyamoto asked him to adjust Link's animations so that he would react to enemies without player input. Link will assume a ready stance if an enemy is near. He'll place his hand on his sword to be ready to draw it if he hasn't drawn it yet. Nishimura said, "Putting in that one little touch has a really big effect on the game." Miyamoto also added Link's ability to throw goats into the game. Aonuma told Nintendo Dream in 2007, "The whole thing of herding goats came from thinking of what could be Link's everyday activities. He was raised up in the country, there's a ranch, he can ride a horse, so he could also raise goats. So we decided Link should be a shepherd, and herding goats was a straightforward event for having fun." However, Mr. Miyamoto wasn't satisfied with just that. He wanted to have another way of interacting with the goats. So we created the event of throwing the rushing goat. Aonuma noted the addition of goat throwing had knock-on effects throughout the game. The mechanic would be worked into the game in a variety of ways. "This game's all about throwing goats from the beginning to the very end," Aonuma said. I should take a moment to talk about the music of the game. The music was composed by a 3-person team comprised of Toru Minegishi, returning from the Wind Waker, Asuka Ota, returning from Four Swords Adventures, and legendary composer Koji Kondo. Though it should be noted that at this point, Kondo was largely in a managerial role. He told Wired in a 2007 interview, "A lot of my time right now is spent checking on the work of the staff, managing them. As far as composition, I did the above ground theme in New Super Mario Bros. And the music for the demo scene in Twilight Princess. The demo he's referring to is the cinematic composed of various clips from the game that plays as an attract screen following the title screen. That particular piece of music was composed for the E3 2005 trailer. Kondo composed the music, but what we hear is an arrangement for orchestra by composer Michiru Oshima. Kondo briefly described the process in a 2005 article in Nintendo Power. He stated that he conducted the orchestra for a short time during recording, which was the first time that he had ever conducted. Kondo noted in an article following the release of the trailer that he'd been asked by a number of journalists if they planned to use orchestrated music in the final game. In that 2005 article, Kondo said that it hadn't been decided at that point, but he stated that he would like to if possible. In the end, the demo music is the only orchestrated piece in the game. The rest are synthesized in line with every previous entry in the series to this point. He told Wired in 2007, "We didn't think that it would be any more impactful or have any benefit over not having it. If we had found a way that a full orchestrated score would have made the game better, we might have done it." He further explained, "One of the things that we worked on was making the music very interactive with the game. Orchestration presented some difficulties that sequenced music didn't. So sequenced music was the best fit to get to that interactive music world." Kondo was also asked about the decision to not use orchestrated music by IGN. He further stated that Nintendo did not bar the use of an orchestra, and that time and budget were not factors in the decision. He said they just didn't feel that the game needed a full orchestra. With Kondo in a more managerial role, Minegishi is the lead musical composer for the game. He and Ota, of course, incorporated some new arrangements of classic themes composed by Kondo, as well as their own original music. In a 2006 article for Nintendo Power, Minegishi said Kondo was a major inspiration for him, stating that he was interested in the original Legend of Zelda as a kid in part because of its sound and music. He referred to Kondo as a true master. Minegishi first got involved with the Zelda series with Majora's Mask, and then continued on with The Wind Waker. He noted in a 2006 article from Nintendo Power that Twilight Princess has a darker, more melancholy atmosphere. "I'm not consciously trying to use any particular genre of music to represent those feelings," he said, "but I want to try to express this melancholic atmosphere at the beginning of the game to engross players. Through Link's efforts, the mood will eventually become more relaxed as the game progresses. At least, that's my plan." The composing team was also in charge of the overall sound design of the game. In his 2005 Nintendo Power article, Kondo said, "It's a really important job that we take seriously, though sometimes we find ourselves in outlandish situations in pursuit of just the right sounds. One day I had to carry a big steel pipe to work, which wouldn't have been a big deal if it weren't that I had to take the train to my office. Everyone on the train stared at me in the most curious way." Minegishi noted in his 2006 article that the sound design was important, saying, "Sometimes sounds can generate more from one's imagination than visuals can. I want to create high-quality sounds to emphasize those moments in Twilight Princess and generate a reality even grander than an Ocarina of Time." Let's get back to the development of the Wii controls. Nintendo first showed the Wii version of the game to the public at E3 2006. Nintendo's press conference that year focused on the Wii. Employees Bill Trinan and Nate Bildorf from the localization team showcased the game live and explained how the controls would work. The game was also available to play at demo kiosks. The demo featured a modified version of the game's second dungeon, the Goron Mines, and Henna's fishing hole. IGN's Pierre Schneider praised the Wii demo, writing the controls delivers something that not only works but feels fresh. He stated the controls brought something truly fresh to the series for the first time since Ocarina of Time. The changes to the control setup in the Wii version adds to the game profoundly and impact the game's feel, he wrote. Fishing feels new, blocking feels new, shooting an arrow feels new. Even the spin attack has a new twist to it. So even though you may encounter a familiar looking puzzle, the new control dynamics give everything a fresh coat of paint. Yes, you can get excited now. A write-up from GameSpot's Ryan Davis was also positive about the demo, though he admitted to having some struggles with the controls. He wrote, "The controls were also quite dense, with virtually every button on both parts of the controller used. And since this was the first Wii game that we were able to get our hands on, the whole experience took a bit of getting used to." Write-ups for Nintendo World Report were much less forgiving. Evan Birchfield called the controls too complex with a high learning curve. He singled out the D-pad being used to manage items as an especially sore point, writing, "The D-pad is just too far up on the Wii remote. Switching between items on the D-pad is laborious since you must reposition your hand to reach it." He also felt the motion controls, the Wii's major selling point, were underused, writing, "There must be items that will use the innovative controller features. However, so far it seems that to use an item, you hit the D-pad and that's it. Where's the revolution in that?" In a separate article, Aaron Kolska wrote, "While not totally broken, the controls were unintuitive and often confusing. For example, unlike the demo shown at the press conference, arrows were not shot by pulling the Wii remote from the nunchuck. The B trigger was used for sword slashing, yet special moves were performed by jerking the nunchuck attachment. Overall, button assignment felt haphazard and hard to remember, being split across the two hands. It seems feedback that the controls were confusing was common. The team got this negative feedback with only 4 months left before release." In his 2007 speech at GDC, Aonuma said initially he wanted to push back against the negative feedback, feeling that people would just needed time to adjust to the unique features of the Wii.
I'd realized that I hadn't thought about making it easy to understand and intuitive, and I realized that I was forcing these controls onto the user. It wasn't a Zelda that would have been received well by the end user. I felt as though Zelda had been left behind by the other launch titles, and having hit rock bottom, Miyamoto and I began rethinking the Wii controls completely.
In an Iwata Asks interview, Aonuma said that he noticed people at E3 instinctively attempted to swing the Wii remote like a sword to use Link's sword. They also used the remote like a rod and reel while fishing, even though the demo used only button controls. Their past experiments with the sword-swinging motion controls had been rejected, but they knew that they had to return to it. They felt that the biggest problem with using the remote to swing the sword was that Link was left-handed. They wanted to make him right-handed to make the controls match the way that people would hold the controller. But Aonuma said they didn't have time to only change Link. And if you think about it, you can see why. Link's design and animations had all been made one way, and mirroring him would require reworking a number of animations and assets to match. Aonuma said the quickest and easiest fix was to simply mirror the entire game. He said that while there was some resistance to the idea on the team at first, he convinced the staff that it was the right move. While they were reworking the controls, they considered making Link's sword slashes match player movement, so that a vertical swing would result in a vertical slice, a horizontal swing would result in a horizontal slice, etc. Ultimately, however, they rejected that idea. Aonuma explained in his GDC speech,
We decided to make ease and comfort our priority, so players knew that when they swung their remote, Link would swing his sword. In order to test this new version and see how playable it really was, we held an internal playtest. When I saw some of our female employees defeating a giant boss, I was confident that, as with the DS Zelda, the realistic Zelda had been reborn.
The feedback from E3 and the redesigned motion controls resulted in other changes beyond simply mirroring the game. The game's opening was completely redesigned. Writer Aya Kiyogoku noted in an Iwata Asks interview that the game originally started with a one-day sequence in Ordon Village. She said Miyamoto developed a plan to expand it into a 3-day sequence. Localization had already gotten underway. To suddenly go and make a change like this, well, I was speechless, Kiyogoku said. The programming had to be changed, the number of items increased, and of course the positioning of characters also changed. It also required some adjustment to the field design. Naturally, all the lines spoken by the characters were affected, so I was frantically getting in touch with Europe and America. I had to tell them, that village is going to be completely changed. Please wait a couple of weeks. Please don't translate anything yet. She mentioned the number of items increased in that quote. Field design lead Asushi Miyagi stated that the slingshot was added to the game at this point. It was put in specifically to facilitate a tutorial on aiming controls on Wii. E3 2006 attendees struggled with aiming. Originally, the camera was controlled with the pointer. There was a graphical overlay put over the screen, sort of a vignette effect. Players could move around freely inside the highlighted circle, but if they moved the camera to the darker areas surrounding it, the camera would begin to move. The team revised the aiming so the horizontal left and right movement was handled with the joystick. Vertical up and down movement was handled with the Wii Remote pointer, but only when a player moved near the edge of the screen. They also added text to alert players when they weren't pointing at the screen. The slingshot and its target shooting tutorial were added specifically to ease players into this new form of aiming. Miyagi noted that they also added a brief pause in the action when players hit something with a projectile, to give them time to realign the pointer. Both Miyagi and Kyogoku stated in the interview that they felt the changes that Miyamoto made to the opening ultimately improved it. They also felt it allowed players to get a better grasp on the unique Wii controls, and Kyogoku felt that it made the story stronger as well. Miyamoto continued to make a variety of changes and adjustments to the game, more or less right up to the end. In an Iwata Asks interview, writer and CinemaScene director Mitsuhiro Takano said, "Everyone will be telling him that there's simply no more time left to make changes. And eventually Miyamoto-san will come around to what you're saying and say, 'Okay, that's it, all done.' Then you can guarantee that in the middle of the night, these emails will start appearing, sent to the game designers saying something along the lines of, 'I want you to change this. If it's not possible, I'll understand, but...' He's asking if it's possible or not, but he's already been told that it's not possible. In any case, we'll receive any number of emails like that, so we'll decide that we have to do it." Sub-director Kentaro Tominaga cited an instance where Miyamoto asked that a sequence that had been designed as a side quest be worked into the main story, as a major change that happened around this time. Tominaga said in an Iwata Asks interview, "Quite far into the latter stages of the project, Miyamoto-san proposed that this should be worked into the main body of the story. Because of the stage we were at, that sent shockwaves through the staff," he laughed. "But once we actually made it, the item that you gained through that event linked really smoothly into the development of the main game. So the feeling was that we'd come up with something really good. So while it wasn't as if things had been totally thrown into disorder, I remember thinking this was perhaps an example of Miyamoto-san upending the tea table." Another change made around this point was the ordering in which Link received the hidden skills throughout the game. According to Aonuma, he originally had the shield attack as the first skill learned in the game. This can be seen in the 2006 E3 demo, where it's referred to as a parry. Miyamoto, however, referred to the shield attack as boring. He much preferred the ending blow. Aonuma and Miyamoto noted that changing the order of the attacks had knock-on effects to other parts of the game, but they agreed that Miyamoto worked with the team to carry out the change while minimizing the damage. By September 2006, Nintendo announced they were delaying the GameCube release. It was a delay of only a few weeks. Despite Miyamoto making changes more or less right up to the end, and the need to overhaul the controls, the team managed to complete the Wii version of Twilight Princess in time for launch. It came out with the Wii on November 19, 2006. The GameCube version was released on December 11, 2006. In terms of sales, Twilight Princess would become the best-selling game in the series at that point, a distinction that it would hold until the release of Breath of the Wild. According to numbers released by Nintendo, the game sold more than 8.8 million copies across both the Wii and the GameCube by September 2015. In 2013, Nintendo released an HD remaster of The Wind Waker. That project came about as the team was experimenting with various models of Link as part of early experiments for Breath of the Wild. Aonuma and the team were so impressed with the results of their experiments on the model of Link from The Wind Waker, they quickly moved into making an HD remaster. In a 2016 interview with Nintendo Life, Aonuma said that they wanted to roll straight into a remaster of Twilight Princess after that. But by that point, work on Breath of the Wild had progressed enough that the Zelda team couldn't take the time to do the remaster. So, Aonuma said he started to look around for outside developers that they could trust with this remaster project. He settled on Tantalus, a developer based in Australia. Tantalus CEO Tom Crago told IGN that Aonuma contacted him in 2013. Nintendo approached us, he said. We had worked with them before on Top Gear Rally on GBA. We'd remained in close contact in the intervening period. I guess they were impressed by the work that we'd done on Mass Effect 3, which was a launch title for Wii U. It's not every day that someone from Nintendo asks you if you're interested in making a Zelda game. So definitely it was a happy moment. Craigo told Nintendo everything. It was several months after Aonuma contacted them before they officially landed the job. They traveled to Kyoto to meet Aonuma and his team a few times, and performed a number of tests before they were given the green light to go into full development. The HD release is based off of the GameCube version of the game. Aonuma told Nintendo Power that's because he wanted to focus on making the game work with the unique features of the Wii U gamepad, and the GameCube controls were closest to the gamepad as a starting point. Craigo said they had access to the code bases of both the GameCube and Wii versions. He said they relied more heavily on the Wii version for visual comparisons of assets on the HD version. He did not state this directly, but it's worth noting that the Wii version was presented in a 16:9 aspect ratio, while the GameCube version was 4:3. So the aspect ratio was likely a factor in why they used the Wii version for visual comparisons. Former Tantalus artist Emily McGregor, in an interview with podcast Kiwi Talks, described the team working on the project as medium-sized, with around 10 programmers and a few artists within Tantalus. Additionally, around 20 artists from outside the studio were contracted to work on the game. She said that they were hired by Nintendo to only redo the textures, the user interface, and rework the controls on Wii U. Both McGregor and Craigo stated that the project took about a year and a half. Craigo told Nintendo everything. Nintendo was very involved in the development of Twilight Princess HD. Aonuma would sign off on everything. Twilight Princess Assistant Director Tomomi Sano was in charge of coordinating the efforts between the two companies. She's worth noting. Sano started her career as an artist at Namco, where she worked on games like Tekken 3 and Ace Combat 3. She jumped ship to Nintendo during the aughts, and quickly moved into a management role. Her work with the Zelda team began with Ocarina of Time 3D. She has worked only on Zelda projects that involved outside companies, and eventually became one of 2 directors on The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. Craigo said that they would have daily video calls to coordinate with Nintendo, and he said the Tantalus team tended to travel to Kyoto when an in-person meeting was needed. Craigo said they reworked every art asset in the game. In addition to a few quality-of-life adjustments, the gamepad was incorporated into the game similar to how it was used in the Wind Waker HD. Items can be swapped without having to pause, maps are viewable on the gamepad, and players can use the gamepad's gyro for motion-controlled aiming. Additionally, the gamepad allows players to transform into a wolf at the press of a button. The HD version also features an added Hero Mode, an increased difficulty option, which mirrors the game world to match the Wii version. It also incorporated features for Nintendo's now-defunct social media service Miiverse by adding stamps into the game that players could use when making posts. Extras using Nintendo's NFC figures known as Amiibo were also added. Figurines of Link and Zelda can be used to refill arrows and health respectively, while a figurine of Ganon can be used to increase enemy damage. Essentially a hard mode difficulty option separate from hero mode. The game was also paired with the release of an all-new amiibo of Wolf Link and Midna. This particular amiibo unlocks an optional dungeon area known as the Cave of Shadows. It's a combat gauntlet dungeon much like the Wind Waker's Savage Labyrinth or Twilight Princess's Cave of Ordeals. Craigo said the idea to incorporate amiibo into the game came late in the development process. He told Nintendo everything. They pitched the idea of having the amiibo unlock areas in the game. Sano briefly described the process on how they settled on the final idea for the Cave of Shadows in an interview with Nintendo Life. She said, "While brainstorming a few ideas, we had the realization that some enemies designed to be fought as human Link could also be defeated while in wolf form. We thought maybe we could create a place where you could have some exciting battles against combinations of those enemies." Twilight Princess HD was released in March 2016. It sold over 1 million copies. Different sites provide different numbers. VGCharts.com puts it at more than 1.5 million sold, while a post on the Install-Base forum claiming to cite numbers directly from Nintendo puts it at 1.17 million copies sold. A list of best-selling Wii U games compiled on Wikipedia has it as the 13th best-selling Wii U game, claiming it sold 1.7 million copies. It's worth noting that the game was released just 1 year before Nintendo released the Switch, making it a fairly late arrival in the life of the Wii U, which was itself Nintendo's weakest selling home console. That may explain why the sales were lower than other Zelda remakes or remasters. Next week, we're going to start my playthrough of Twilight Princess. There was a lot of information put out about this game in the lead up to its release and afterwards, so I will try to work some of that additional information into coming episodes. If you want to follow along, please subscribe. And if you've already subscribed, thank you. You are incredible, and thank you for sticking to the end of this long episode. I'm Paul Riley, and I will see you next week.